Highland and Montpelier, the former plantations of Presidents James Monroe and James Madison, have long attracted visitors seeking to experience the power of historic places, looking to learn more about two of America's founders, and wishing to understand the role the institution of slavery played in the formation of the United States.
We know that history can be understood at the places where it actually happened, in a way it can't be understood through documents and books alone. As public sites that engage visitors with history and the legacies of our shared past, it is our responsibility to present history on its truest terms.
Madison and Monroe, the fourth and fifth presidents of the United States, were colleagues, friends, and neighbors. Their former homes, Montpelier and Highland, are only 40 minutes apart today. Madison is known as the father of the U.S. Constitution for his contributions to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 in Philadelphia, his work to craft the Bill of Rights, and his lifelong devotion to democracy and rule of law. Here in Madison's library at Montpelier, James Madison shaped the ideas that would become the framework of the United States Constitution. Preparing for the convention, Madison meticulously studied past attempts at self-government and organized his thoughts into what he believed were the ideal principles for a representative democracy. Whereas republics in the past had generally been small, Madison argued that extending the principle of representative government across a wide geographic area would result in broad interest and participation on the part of the public. This would ensure that no one group or faction would be able to completely control the government. But even as Madison embraced this concept of an extended republic, he struggled with the contradiction of slave ownership in a democratic society. The Constitution opens with a message of inclusivity, establishing justice and ensuring domestic tranquility for the people. Madison and his fellow framers were considered revolutionary thinkers who created what would become the first successfully functioning government by the people. Their ideas of fairness, justice, and individual rights are what many world leaders emulate today. Why then did so many brilliant minds pledge to be champions of individual rights on one hand, then on another, own other human beings? Slavery, when all was said and done, was both profitable and convenient for many white Americans. The 5,000-acre Montpelier plantation was the home and the product of people who had no share in the Madison's wealth, status, or privilege, and who were not included in the grand vision of the Republic. This community persevered despite the injustices they suffered. They sought knowledge and opportunity. They created a society and culture among themselves. They looked after one another and left families and legacies that survive to this day.
Highland is a place that strives to explore and create a big tent inclusive history, sharing the political life of James Monroe and also taking a hard look at the social and economic history of the time, in which enslaved women, men, and children were crucial individuals. We do this with the close collaboration of a council of descendant advisors who trace their ancestors to this place as laborers here at Highland, enslaved before the U.S. Civil War and afterwards as generations of African Americans who continued to work this land. Highland grew to be a 3,500-acre plantation where enslaved workers grew tobacco and grain as cash crops, as well as fruit, timber, animals for meat, and sheep for wool. Highland was Monroe's private home while he was governor of Virginia, ambassador to France, Great Britain, and Spain, Secretary of State and Secretary of War under President Madison, as well as a two-term U.S. president himself. Monroe was an American statesman, lawyer, and diplomat, best known for expanding the young United States, negotiating fixed boundaries with other countries, and issuing the Monroe Doctrine, which was a policy statement opposing European colonialism in the Americas. He also led with surprisingly widespread popularity during times of social and political disagreement. These duties took the Monroe family all over the world. They visited Highland at specific times of the year, though they were not here throughout the season for months at a time. While the Monroes were here, and for the long periods they were away, the work of the plantation and its management were in the hands of several dozen enslaved men and women and hired overseers. Monroe was the diplomat who signed the Louisiana Purchase Treaty with France, which doubled the size of the country and also fueled the slave trade in vast new territories. As cotton took over as the nation's economic engine, grain plantations in Virginia could not keep pace. Mounting debts forced Monroe to sell Highland after the presidency as part of this economic trend. Monroe also sold enslaved families from Highland to a cotton plantation in northern Florida, part of the domestic slave trade, where mid-Atlantic planters sold enslaved workers to meet labor demands in the Deep South. Highland represents economic and agricultural trends of the Upper South, spurred by the acquisition of the Louisiana Territory, signed and negotiated by James Monroe. Highland changed hands numerous times after its sale by Monroe in 1826. The property history became confused as the years passed. The last private owner bequeathed Highland to William and Mary in 1974, and Highland is still a part of William and Mary.
A 30-year process of discovery has unearthed a complex, multi-layered history of Montpelier. Working with historians, preservation specialists, curators, and specialist scientists, Montpelier's archaeologists have added to our understanding of not only the Madison's house and its formal grounds, but also the homes, lives, and burial sites of the enslaved men, women, and children who lived, worked, and died at Montpelier.
Over time, a guest house built during Monroe's presidency became misunderstood as the main house at Highland. Following several years of research, we announced in 2016 that the archaeological remains of the original real main house had been located, and tree ring dating and documentary research had established that the standing structure is actually a guest house built by two enslaved carpenters named Peter Mallory and George Williams. The publicity surrounding this discovery led to initial contact with a descendant of an enslaved family from Highland. Further connections developed, and these are the relationships that grew into the establishment of Highland's Descendant Council.
Over the past 2 decades, both Highland and Montpelier have elevated the importance of engaging with the descendants of those enslaved on the plantations. Montpelier staff began collaborating with descendants on the interpretation of African American history in the 1990s. And in 2019, descendants created an independent organization called the Montpelier Descendants Committee. In a first ever milestone for museums and historic sites that are former places of enslavement, the Montpelier Board of Directors resolved to create parity with descendants and fully collaborate with the Montpelier Descendant Committee, and amended its bylaws to support equality. This vote came after tremendous leadership from and collaboration with the Montpelier Descendants Committee and the Montpelier Foundation, and represents an important step toward equity and reckoning with histories of racism. The relationship provides a national model for resolving historic imbalances in decision-making, power, and authority.
Highland's core initiative is collaborative reinterpretation, which relies on the perspectives and expertise of the descendant community. This commitment is central to our public interpretation in programs, lectures, and exhibits. A current project also brings these concepts into the classroom and creates a dynamic, experiential learning environment that crosses the boundaries between academia and the wider public community. Using the concepts of collaborative reinterpretation, Highland is currently finalizing the installation of research-driven, community-engaged exhibitions in the Presidential Guest House. Our next public history project will be the reinterpretation of other site spaces. Highland, in recreating its central site narratives, is at a moment of opportunity to put forward inclusive stories about a formative period in U.S. history.
In a world that is constantly changing, places like Montpelier and Highland connect people with history, including new and inclusive narratives. They are the landmarks of our identity as Americans, and they are relevant to each generation in new ways.
Americans argue loudly about what our country is, who it is for, and what it means. These debates help shape and reshape, hopefully deepen our understanding of history and identity. Museums like these that embody our identity are the perfect venues for those discussions and debates, and for new stories about the past. At these places where history actually occurred, we have the opportunity to come together and talk about what our difficult histories mean.
We think that our history is important, especially to the Mandela Fellows.
I look forward to talking with you and to sharing ideas and hearing your perspectives.